the live stream is now started. Before I formally start this, which will be possibly the final virtual meeting, I'll go to each committee member to confirm that they can hear and be heard. And there's a legal requirement for me to do so. So if you could verbally confirm that you're able to hear me, and I'll confirm in response that I can hear you. Please, where practicable, please also have your video switched on so that you can be seen by other members in attendance and the public watching. Councillor Christy Balderson.
Morning, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Bolter.
Good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Ginman.
Good morning, Chair and colleagues. I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Bob Matthews.
Yes, good morning, Chair. I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Councillor Diana Toynbee.
Good morning. Yes, thank you. I can see you and hear you.
Councillor Yolande Watson.
Good morning, Chair. I can hear you and see you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd also like to request that the officers who will be present throughout the meeting also confirm that they can hear and be heard. Kate Charlton, Interim Head of Legal Services.
Good morning, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Caroline Marshall, our Clerk to the committee.
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Jen Priest, our Technical Support Officer.
Yes, Chair, I can hear and see you.
Thank you. And Josie Rushgrove, our Deputy Section 151 Officer.
Apologies, I was on mute. Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you.
Right. Thank you. Right, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. The Council is video and audio streaming this meeting live on the internet and making an official recording. The recording forms part of the public record of the meeting and will be available on the Council's website. Please note that while it is only a legal requirement that you have your audio switched on, it is the Council's preference that, where you're able to do so, you also have video switched on. Please remember what you say and do in this meeting has a global reach, and your words and actions should be chosen carefully. Can I also remind members to ensure that they are wearing their headsets while listening and speaking during the meeting? There are some additional points for members and officers to be aware of. As part of our meeting etiquette and in line with our normal committee practice, all microphones apart from mine will be placed on mute at the start and during the meeting. I will run through the agenda in the customary way. When you wish to speak, please raise your virtual hand. I will then invite you to speak in the order of hands being raised. Please remember to unmute yourself to speak and mute yourself when you've finished. Please do not raise your physical hand, as I do not want to miss anyone who may wish to speak. Please note the chat facility has been switched off to ensure that members' contributions can be offered through the spoken voice and for the public record. Please ensure all mobile devices are switched off to prevent interference with the audio and video system. If any attendee loses connection to the meeting will be paused to ascertain if the connection can be restored quickly. If it's not possible to recover the connection or within a reasonable amount of time, the meeting will continue as long as a quorum of committee members remains able to hear the proceedings and be heard. If you plan to leave before the end of the meeting, please can you indicate this in advance. Voting will be undertaken electronically using the voting software within the virtual meeting platform. Only committee members may vote. An electronic log of voting choices selected by committee members will be kept. If the vote is unanimous, it will be recorded as such in the minutes. If the vote is not unanimous, a record of the voting choices of each committee member will be published as an appendix to the formal minutes of the meeting. In the event that the electronic voting is not possible to use or is a technology failure, I will ask each committee member by means of a roll call to indicate if they are for, against, or are abstaining. The results of the roll call will only be recorded in the minutes of the meeting where there is a requirement to do so. Are there any questions about the procedures before we continue? Thank you. I will now formally open the meeting. So item 1 on the agenda, apologies for absence. As everyone's here, I'm making the presumption there are no apologies. and therefore there are no name substitutions, which is item 2 of the agenda. Item 3 of the agenda, declarations of interests. Are there any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interests to be declared for items on the agenda today? Could you please do this by raising your virtual hand and ask you to speak to notify the meeting which item you have an interest in and the nature of that interest? No. Thank you. Item 4, minutes of the previous meeting of the 16th of March 2021. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Committee members, please cast your vote either for, against, or abstain. Please ensure you press submit after selecting the option for which you are voting. If you're unable to see the voting options, please access the poll icon at the bottom of your screen. Can I have the confirmation of the voting number?
Chair, we have 7 voting members and the poll should be on their screen. All votes are in, Chair, and the minutes have been unanimously approved.
Thank you. So that's unanimous approval, and the committee's action tracker is attached to the minutes. Are there any members who wish to raise any questions on the action tracker? Councillor Ginman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just draw your attention to number 90 on the action tracker. That is due for progress, and it says 1st of June 21. I know there's considerable concern about this position at the moment, and I just wondered where we are. I mean, hopefully that is going to be, it says in progress, and I'm assuming we will have some sort of report around that actually being completed for that date. But I know there is great concern about building and the problems related to it and the phosphate issues. And I just want to make sure it is progressing as we would have hoped.
Mr. Harris, would you be able to give any indication or?
I've got to be honest, in coming back from the breakout room, I missed the start of that conversation.
Right. This is looking at our actions arising from minutes, and okay. We're looking at action number 90, that consideration be given to the inclusion of a risk in connection with the river lug position statement, which may mean that there is a potential impact of disproportionate housing allocation in certain parts of the county. And the recognising the due date's not until the 1st of June, nevertheless, Councillor Jimmins raising the point that it's uppermost in the minds of most councillors, certainly those living in the north of the county and in the Lug catchment, and whether or not you're in a position to offer any.
I can confirm that the question went back to the Economy and Place Directorate. I'm just having a very quick scan as to see. Can I pick it up as part of the risk register conversation? Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions arising from the action register? If not, I'll move on to the item that I'd like to move to agenda item 8 first, and then come back to agenda item 7. So if we can take agenda item 8 first, so that
Councillor Shaw, apologies. Would you like to deal with items 5 and 6, which are questions from members of the public, and any questions from councillors?
Sorry. Yeah. So to receive any questions from members of the public, item 5. Have any questions been received from members of the public?
No questions were received.
Thank you. And agenda item 6, to receive any questions from councillors. Were any questions received?
No questions were received.
Fine, thank you. Let's then move on to agenda item 8, the update on the internal audit recommendations. We're taking this first because we've got a number of assistant directors and also the head of educational development with us today. I'm going to be asking them to comment on Appendix 1 or Appendix A of this internal audit report. So the internal current audit recommendations, recommendation for this agenda item is that the status of current audit recommendations be reviewed and the committee to determine any recommendations it wishes to make in order to provide further assurance that risks identified by audit activity are being actively managed. And if I just move to that now. Paul, do you want to just introduce this report?
Yes, happy to just give you a quick introduction, Chair. Thank you, committee. This is the update of the internal audit recommendations as at the end of March 2021 in respect of actions recommendations made from internal audit work. In essence, the report is split into 3 sections, looking at recommendations that have previously been reported to the committee as overdue, those which were due since the last report to committee, and those which are due in the future. For the first cohort of reviews, so as at the last report to committee in November, there were 10 recommendations identified as overdue. 4 of these recommendations have since been complete. I should draw committee's attention and apologise. At paragraph 7, we've written 3 complete. It's actually 4, and you'll find that corroborated in Appendix A. Appendix A also provides the updates and the updated completion dates as identified by officers. So 2 of those recommendations are in respect of the healthy lifestyle trainer services, 2 in respect of continuing health care funding, 1 in respect of schools property maintenance, and 1 in respect of quality assurance around adult social care. As you referred to before, committee have requested attendance from ADs in relevant areas. Between March 2020 and March 21, 42 further recommendations were due for completion. 71% of those were complete following self-assessment of lead officers. Those not complete, 12 recommendations remain incomplete, 4 of which are priority 2 recommendations, 8 of which are priority 3. Details of those can be found in Appendix B. And finally, future audit recommendations. So the table at paragraph 10 of the report identifies 10 recommendations due in the future. 6 of those are progressing to timescales or complete, 3 of which have been identified as potentially delayed and identified as amber, and 1 of those is likely to be delayed and has been identified as red. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. So while we're got Appendix A up, it's page 55 of our papers. These deal with recommendations due before September 30th, 2020, and I just want to touch on a few of them and ask for comment from the relevant officers present in respect of where we're got target dates which have been significantly delayed from their initial date. Obviously, we can see we've got some narrative in the papers before us, but I think it will be of use for the committee to just hear from officers responsible as to whether the current target dates are realistically going to be realised. So if I just go through them in the order that they are, as it were, in the report, we're looking at a priority 3, property maintenance for schools, and a simple set of procedures. We recommend that a simple set of procedures be set up for compilation of the annual maintenance program planning spreadsheet and for the planning and approval of additional emergency works. Now, I do recall that this item has a risk, I believe, is it in the corporate risk register? Yes. In terms of the property maintenance for schools. So it is of some importance. And if the original completion date, target date, was the 30th of June 2020, we've now got a revised date of the 31st of September 2021. And I'd invite the head of educational development, is that Quintin Mee? Yes, just to explain to the committee why the delays in this.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee members. Without trying to pass blame or make excuses, I came to post just approximately a year ago, and this particular item was not handed over to me, unfortunately. So when we were asked to comment on this just a few weeks ago, this is the first I knew about it. That being said, like I say, I've been in post for a year, and there's a number of observations I've made myself that would sort of go in parallel with what the audit has also seen. In that the data that we have, although it's good that we have that data, I don't think we evaluate it correctly or analyze it in a way that's brings the best from that data. And one of them, the things I have seen is that it's not presented in a way that's easy to look at and form an action plan. So I think when we look at a decision-making model, it's good that we've collected that data. We do analyze it. The way we present it is very archaic. I think we do need to improve that, and I think there's the technology that out there now to better display what we want to achieve and where and why. Chair, if I may share my screen.
By all means, yes, if we can manage the technology.
Let me. Oh, it's disabled, so I'm unable to. Unfortunately.
Jen, can you?
You should be able to do it now, Quentin.
I'll try again. So I think going off the recommendation, I think something more visual as the dashboard you might be able to see now, I hope. What we have in the back of this dashboard is the data that would have been seen in the spreadsheets in its very raw form. I think from that raw data, we'll give it a lesser raw indication of what we want to do around the planned maintenance. And I think it'll be a lot easier to visualize something like this, where we can put facts and figures to what we've established from the surveys itself. So then we can look at each school individually, compare it to one another school, and the spend that's required at each school per square meter, per pupil, for example. So this, I've commissioned our IT department to see if they can use Power BI to have this more, have a display a lot more like this. And what this will allow us to do is to look at where the priorities lies, and then put the works together. So in this example, we're looking at electrical installations to see there's economy scales to be had when we can deliver the projects with the budget we have. Obviously, we have a conditions grant that comes from the government each year, around approximately 1.2 million, and it's how we best spend that, getting best value for money, but also bringing the estate, improving the school estate. I did notice a comment around what we could do better around our emergency works. Unfortunately, by its very nature, it's hard to plan for these other than having a contingency to deal with them as and when they come in. Now, because the gap of the estate itself is so wide, what we are finding is that there is a lot more reactive maintenance that is required. Certainly in the last 12-month period, we spent over £300,000 on reactive maintenance. And if we compare that to 5 years previous, that was around £60,000. So our reactive maintenance is going up, and we're having to reprioritise our planned maintenance so that we can routinely deliver emergency pieces of work. So it's hard to put that into a spreadsheet or a format, but it is in the back of our minds that emergency works is going on. Also, what I have introduced since being in post is a matrix system. So from the maintenance surveys that we receive, we score each piece of work so that it's that there's a clear priority of why we're coming up with the program that we are. This works on the 1 to 4 A to D conditions survey that comes with the scoring and the pricing. We scored that, so the 1 to 4 has been reverse scored, the A to D has been scored 1 to 4, and then we also look when the time that we need to deliver that project is in years, and we give that a score of 1 to 4. Multiply that, gives us a matrix scoring, so then we can clearly demonstrate why we're prioritising particular jobs. So although this action point, it suggests it hasn't been done, observations have been made and things have been implemented. So for example, the current program of work is a 2-year program. Previously it was year on year, but somewhat piecemeal. I intend to move that to a program of works for the lifespan of a survey, so that we can better achieve economies of scale by bringing works together, but also not just in the schools world. I think it would be helpful to do that in the corporate maintenance program to make sure we are hitting every opportunity. So although this action point hasn't been completed yet, I have commissioned IT to have a look at this. They're also, this particular graphic you're looking at the moment is a commercial product that we could look to invest in, or an equivalent, so that we've got I think what we do need to do is a better data-driven exercise year on year, and this is the sort of way forward to do that, I think. So the action point, I think, would be completed by September as per the revised date, and I can only apologise it hasn't been done sooner, but it is certainly on my radar.
Thank you. Thank you, Quentin. Committee, any questions on what you've just heard? I think it's of concern to me that the handover wasn't made appropriately or properly to you, and you can't there's no issue of blame on you for that. It's a matter of procedure, I think, and if we, I don't know, to take some sort of recommendation that that any audit actions outstanding are passed to new post holders as a matter of course, which is what I would have anticipated, because otherwise I'm not sure how they get picked up.
I think with this, Chair, I mean, the book does need to stop with me because I am now the head of this department, but also that I was a victim of circumstance, really. I think if things in the world hadn't happened, it started off with the floods and then obviously COVID, I think a proper and thorough handover would have happened. But I've just got to deal with the hand I've got now and make this right. So I think I've made inroads unbeknown to this. I think I've made inroads into it anyway by virtue. So hopefully there's some assurance there that I think this is a one-off, and I say I will pass no blame to any sort of predecessor of mine on that basis.
Yeah, I mean, the principal thing I think the committee will be concerned about is that this is sort of an endemic problem of new post or senior post holders coming into office and not being aware of ongoing actions upon them. So I would probably look, I don't know, to either the head of HR or the head of paid service to give me some assurance, give the committee some assurance that that was not the case. Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, just following up, it was exactly the same point in perhaps a slightly different way, that I'm not I think, Quinton, the word blame is always a dangerous one here. What we're really looking at is who's taking responsibility, ensuring that the responsibility is there. We've actually now just created a new risk for the risk register, which is that people fail to pass on crucial information that means items get dropped, and it's ensuring that that doesn't happen. So I suppose one of the important things here is that there is a not just a handover by the individual, but that there is a system that ensures it captures those risks. That risk that it, you know, what is it I don't know is the real question, which is always a difficult one, isn't it? But with regard to the particular, yeah, I'm sure the IT is very exciting, but I do want to make sure that it actually practically solves the problem. So I do think we want to look in September as the date at what actually it looks like, so that we're not missing out on ensuring that the proper processes for the schools in terms of the ever-changing priorities, and I totally accept that suddenly there is something that comes along and creates a new problem. We only need a excessive gust of wind or a bit more flooding, and suddenly your priorities look a bit silly and they have to change. But we just need to be assured that you've got the mechanisms in place to capture it and to get on with the routine as well as the exceptional.
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. I've got Paul Harris and then Kate Charlton. So, Paul.
I just wanted to assure committee I'll be taken away to understand why that recommendation didn't follow, looking into why that didn't follow and why Quentin didn't get an earlier
nudge,
awareness nudge, yes, as to why that had happened. So I'll have a look into that.
Thank you. And Kate.
I can't take myself off mute. Apologies, Chair. Yes, I will take away the wider issue with regard to concerns about handovers and how information is fed and how it can be incorporated into a proper process and when that will happen. So I'll take that away.
Thank you.
On behalf of Claire. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Balderson.
Thank you, Chair. And one of the things that I just wanted to clarify was appreciate that school assets is also on the corporate risk register, which is essentially capturing the risks outside our risk appetite. So do you envisage that the actions that you're taking in relation to this will have any impact on that corporate risk, and whether we would potentially see a reduction in the residual risk as a result of any of the work that you're doing?
To some extent, and only slight extent, is I think this is around how we use the data that we have to understand it, manipulate it, and decide a priority to deliver the maintenance that that's paid for by the government. I think the risk on the corporate register is around the gap about how much maintenance is required on our assets compared to the money that we come in, and what we find is that gap's getting bigger, as I alluded to before, that because the dilapidation continues, we're having to react rather than being proactive. So I have put a paper to my line management chain around maybe how we could reduce that gap. But ultimately it requires investment, and you know, there is a priority for investment also. So to answer your question, not entirely, but what it will give us is the tool to know what our estate looks like better, and where we can reprioritize things quite quickly using the tools that we have. So this is really about the data. The actual physical dilapidation is a different risk in itself. And I think that's the risk there is around school closures, in part or full, if something happens within the school, leaking roof, etc. So they are slightly different, Councillor.
Thank you. If I can then move on down our list, I don't know, is there anybody to talk to the adult wellbeing contract monitoring quality assurance strategy? That wasn't one. No.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, sorry, Paul. I didn't see you down there. So I think right. So this is recommend that an agreement be reached on method of reporting KPIs for domiciliary care, which will provide an efficient solution to the staff, and that this will be developed, implemented within a reasonable timescale. Originally, target date was the 31st of March 2020, and a revised date now, 31st of October 21. So I suppose the question is, are you going to meet 31st of October 21, and what have been the problems in delivering?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee members. Absolutely, we will be meeting the timeframe of October 21. This particular issue relates to the retendering of home care, which has been a long-standing piece of work. The contract was due to end in March 20. We took an early decision that wasn't going to be suitable, and we wanted to extend the contract. The contract had an extension facility within it, so we extended the contract, and then of course, we then had COVID, so we extended the contract further until October 21. I can confirm that all the work involved in retendering this piece of work now is underway, and the KPIs in the new specification have been developed. And there was an all members briefing session held on the 13th of April this year, where members, and it was attended by 20 members, and members had the opportunity to critique and challenge the approach to the home care tender. That was undertaken successfully, and members were able to influence some elements of the specification. Prior to that, the specification was also taken to the Making It Real board, so people with lived experience were able to influence the specification, and that specification, including the KPIs that have now been developed, is due to go to scrutiny approximately the 17th of May. The scrutiny date for May is yet to be confirmed, but it is currently penciled in for the 17th. And the KPIs included in the specification will be going to full cabinet on the 24th of June, and the tender will commence on the 1st of July with a completion date and a mobilisation date of the 1st of November. So we are in a robust revised position now, and those KPIs are available to members should they wish to see them. They were available at the members session on the 13th of April, but I do have an Excel spreadsheet of those KPIs available should any member wish to receive them specifically. So yes, we are in a robust position now.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for that very comprehensive answer to the query raised. Committee members, any questions you want to ask? Are we all content? Thank you. Oh, sorry, Councillor Toynbee.
Are we still on Appendix A, or are we on the whole item? Okay. We can't hear you.
Sorry, if there's something you want to ask that Paul can assist with, then by all means ask the question.
Well, it's a point of clarification, really, which is my own ignorance. On page 73 of the, I think this is Appendix B, on page 73 of the pack, I just would like to know what income charging means.
Okay, apologies, Chair, but my internet connection has disappeared for that particular. I can't get the papers up, unfortunately.
Right.
So I can't see what is the point that the council was raising.
We're talking about page 73, income charging. This is under Appendix B 1.1. We recommend the Chief Finance Officer ensures a review of the current income charging principles is carried out, including consideration as to whether a corporate income charging policy procedure document would be. Is that's to do with? That's not necessarily to do with adults, though, is it? I'm looking at Josie. Do you want to come in, Josie, on that?
Yes, it's a comprehensive review that includes adults, but there are lots of other things that we charge for, and an income charging policy review is underway.
Yeah.
What is income charging? What does it mean?
So it could be car parking, it could be charges to clients, it could be planning fees, it could be fees for using the crematorium services. There's lots of
It's any positive revenue coming into the council from
service
service users. Yeah.
It's not, to me, it's not a very self-explanatory label for what it actually means, but maybe that's just me. To me, income charging is not self-explanatory at all, even when I read the table. Anyway, thank you.
If you've got a better suggestion of this, we'll give it some thought ourselves.
There's a lot in accounts which isn't immediately self-explanatory, I must admit. Thank you. So if I rush back, as it were, scrolling through my screen back to where we were in Appendix 1. There are two more actions, priority 2s under continuing healthcare. I think, Paul, you did speak to committee about those when you came to the meeting in March. I don't know if there's any updates you want to provide. That's the funding process, where there's two recommendations that the CHC dispute policy should be viewed with consideration given to any changes required, in particular the time frame for a meeting to be arranged for cases subject to dispute resolution process at level 2. Once the policy is formally agreed between the council and the CCG, it should be signed off, and also a recommendation that a formal written backdating protocol is developed and approved between the council and the CCG. Originally, these were due for the 30th of April 2020, and I think COVID may well be the reason that the revised date's now looking at 31st of July 21. Are we still on progress for July 21 for these?
Yes, Chair, I did discuss these issues at the previous audit committee. I'll give a brief summary and then I'll hand over to my colleague Mandy Appleby, if that's okay, in terms of an update of where we are. Certainly COVID did have an impact because, as you're aware, CHC assessments were suspended during the COVID period. So we weren't able to engage with the CCG around CHC at that point. But as confirmed at the last audit committee, we have now re-engaged with the CCG around continuing healthcare. And in fact, we've gone further than that, and there is an ongoing piece of work that Mandy's leading on in terms of reviews of CHC cases. We did have quite an extensive discussion at the last audit committee. I wonder whether, Mandy, you want to just give an update of where we are with that programme, because I know we've made extensive progress on that in the last few months.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Chair. Yes, the dispute policy, etc., and both those actions are within my responsible area of Assistant Director of Operations. We have got to the point. Paul is absolutely right that it was due to COVID. And redeployment of CHC and CCG for that team and the work being done on it was the reason that was shelved. Of course, during that time we had a separate funding for anybody who needed who was newly assessed within that time, and that was part of the COVID funding. After that, we had a retrospective period of making sure that everybody that had been placed or had any service through the COVID funding had to be reassessed and put into the right pathway. And that work has now been completed on time, so that we're able now to proceed with the finalising of the dispute process. It's split here into two categories, but actually what we're working on is including the second recommendation into the first, because it obviously any retrospective payments that become, whether that's us contributing to sending funding over to CCG or vice versa, CCG to us, then that's usually part of the dispute policy. So just to clarify that we're working on the one policy to include the two. I don't see any reason that we won't meet that next deadline. We have got it in draft. There are still some changes that we want to make from the council, but we have a meeting in place with the chief nursing officer and the nominated officer in CCG, where we'll be discussing that the finalisation of the policy. Regarding the work that Paul has alluded to, we have a plan actually that partly was set out to the scrutiny board in a report this week, working with the CCG on how we will be progressing assessments in the future, and that includes a range of reviews that we need to undertake together. But our commitment really is in working very closely with the CCG, and we've made, I think, real progress in the last 6 months to getting a much stronger working relationship with them to proceed. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mandy. Committee, any questions on this item? No. Well, thank you for your explanation. It looks, it seems that work is proceeding. I know it can be an ongoing process of iteration to get these processes and procedures completed. There will be a sigh, I think, of relief all round if we get them completed by the current target date. So to come back if there are further, and we'll come back to you if there are further delays, obviously, to hear more. Yeah. Councillor Ginman.
Sorry, there's a bit of a background noise of helicopters, and I apologise for that, but nothing I can do about it. One thing in noting these, that they are completed, it means the task is done, but do we then get a further sort of audit of how good that completion is? Because I noticed one or two of these. Now I'll just pick up one at random. On page 62, the facilities management 171, we recommend the responsibility for addressing client queries should be revisited by the commercial and contracts manager. And I sort of look at that and go, very good, fine, it's completed. How do we know it's actually satisfactorily completed? Because sometimes in picking that one, I've done so because of certain comments that come back to you from the residents, and it makes me wonder. And I'm also not totally sure what this should include: permitted allowance such as obtaining materials to complete the task in order to improve transparency. Can somebody translate that for me, please?
Thank you, Councillor Ginman. I don't know whether we have any volunteers. We've got Mr. Harris has put his hand up. So
brave man.
In terms of the translation of the spiel on that one page, perhaps not. What I can confirm though, in terms of the audit process, so when we have priority 3, any recommendations, obviously it's a self-assessment to understand whether it's being completed or not completed. My understanding is any audits which identify priority 2 recommendations or priority 1 recommendations, we don't see many of those. But where we have those, we have a planned follow-up process which goes back and revisits that audit a period of time down the line. So in those instances, it will pick up all the previous recommendations and review the completion of those. If it's an audit which only identifies priority 3 recommendations in the first instance, we're just going by a self-assessment process.
Thank you, Paul. So
just to sort of follow up on that, and Paul, I would appreciate the translation of that if we can, as to what that actually means. And it does raise a question in my mind, Chair, as to hopefully we see those audits, do we, that are being followed through on there, and we can be comfortable. And the timing of those, who sets the timing of those audits of those parts? Is that set by the departments themselves or externally?
It's agreed between the internal audit and the department, and I think normally the 151 officer has a toe in that as well, as it were. Obviously, usually it's agreed so that it takes place. Quite often, some of these issues are for periodic pieces of work which take place during certain months of the year, and not necessarily an ongoing practice, so that the internal audit review takes place at an appropriate time when it can pick up changes to that piece of work. There might be an instance, I suppose, I mean, it's up for committee to decide or to recommend to the 151 officer whether they consider that a sample of sort of Schedule 3, Priority 3 actions should be included. It's up for the committee to decide whether that might be a recommendation. If we have concerns that Priority 3 items aren't being as rigorously implemented as is suggested by the report. But do we want to consider that going forwards?
Yeah, if Priority 3's, is there a risk that Priority 3 suddenly becomes a Priority 2 because it hasn't been attended to in the way that we expected? It seems to be that is a risk in itself. So therefore, sampling it would seem to me to be an appropriate way forward.
I think perhaps if we, Caroline, we could take that as a recommendation that we discuss that with internal audit when they next attend this meeting, because I think getting internal audit's view on that would assist us in our making of a recommendation. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Just moving on through this list. We've got, I don't know, do we have anybody from Healthy Lifestyles Wellbeing Information?
Yes, Chair. So that's within the Talk Community Department. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. So sometimes it's a matter of interpretation of the language, as we've discussed before, as to what department some of these things sort of allude to. I don't intend to read this one out because it's a very long recommendation, but it's to do with populating agendas, progress against PDP objectives, question on DCRs. Perhaps you could just explain what those are. I'll revisit it to determine if it would be beneficial to make other fields mandatory. Yes, it's very opaque in terms of its language if you're not very familiar with the activities under discussion. And I suspect you could only understand that recommendation in reference to the original internal audit report, which we don't have in front of us at the moment. But perhaps the item of interest to us, it's a Priority 3, was due target date of the 30th of April 2020, revised date 31st of July 21. Perhaps we could just talk about that.
Yes, of course, Chair. Thank you. And thanks to the committee. Yes. So there are a number of recommendations on this report. I can report back that in terms of the recommendations with 1.3, all bar questions on the DCRS are revisited to determine around the mandatory fields.
Could you just explain DCRS for us and people that might be listening or watching?
Yeah, of course. So DCRS is a system that the Healthy Lifestyle Trainers Service used in terms of both putting information in around their cohorts and their clients, but also then to that that will pull off reports around outcomes and KPIs and key performance indicators for that service. So it's effectively the monitoring platform, if you like, and CRM system for our Healthy Lifestyle Trainer service. So all bar that recommendation, I can say, are now complete within that first top box. We have reviewed the DCRS mandatory fields as requested by the audit, and some of those have been updated and populated. As part of the recently evolved and developed Talk Community division, so it's sort of been about a year now in place, we have been reviewing some of our processes, but also as part of this, we have actually I've led on a piece of work around redesigning the teams and reviewing the structure within the teams, so it sort of looks to take forward the Talk Community objectives going forward. That has now been completed. I started it in October. We had to pause it due to COVID. I've just recently started it again, and it's now been completed. So part of that work, what we will do is we will revisit the KPIs on the system in light of the recently redesigned team to ensure that they are aligned and they are we can report on them effectively. And our reporting mechanism is that we report on a monthly basis into our core DLT management meeting, which is assistant directors and with Stephen Vickers as the director, and we report on our performance. So so in terms of that, those recommendations, like I say, that one is just outstanding, and that will absolutely be completed by the revised date, and that's only to review and reflect the recently slight change in terms of the structure and the key performance indicators for that service. The other ones was in terms of the alignment to the current processes and compliance with Herefordshire Council policy. They are in progress again, they are ongoing. And we have won this, again, once this audit was completed, we did review our processes, but we are going to be looking at those processes again in light of the recent redesign of the team within Talk Community. And that will be completed by the revised date. And sorry, one other thing, sorry, Chair, if I may, just also worth noting to the committee that the Healthy Lifestyle Trainer service were one of the key teams that was involved with the COVID response for Talk Community. They were redeployed most of last year into the Talk Community COVID response as our link worker function, but obviously now back to sort of business as usual.
Thank you for that. And thank you for your explanation and the confirmation that the target date of the 31st of July will be achieved. Committee, any questions? No. Thank you then, Amy, for that explanation. There are other items on this report, but I don't think anything is as target dates are as old as the ones that we've discussed. So to the committee, do you have any other questions on either Appendix A, Appendix B, or the report itself that you want to raise? Councillor Balderson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to also express my thanks to the officers that have attended. The updates that you provided, I think I found extremely useful and a lot more comprehensive than what was in the update column. So I really do appreciate that. Just two things that I wanted to mention. Firstly, I know there was some mentions in some of the officer responses about their liaison with scrutiny committees, etc. And one of the things from a rethinking governance perspective that I found interesting is what internal audit and or follow-up internal audit recommendation information is shared with scrutiny, because that's something I think would be probably useful information for those particular committees. So I know in our work we have identified that potentially A&G could attend some of the protocol meetings on a quarterly basis to try and provide more information around risk. But I think some of this other internal audit information may be quite just as important to pick up on with scrutiny. The other question probably more a question than a comment, was probably directed to Paul, because just from an overall perspective, last report we had about 10 outstanding items with about 64% on track for completion. And now we've got 12 outstanding items and about 60% on track to completion. So there is a bit of a downward trend. So I just wanted to understand, I mean, now that we're starting to come out of COVID, and there should be less delays due to COVID, are there any other underlying reasons or action being done to try and address this downward trend? Or if it's just a, it's just because of other reasons?
Of course. I don't want to kind of consider it a trend as obviously a month-to-month comparison or a one report comparison to the next, but I take your point completely. What I will say on that 60% progressing to timescales, I mean, 3% or 3 of those actions are identified as amber. So we identify it as amber as there may be some problems here, and we may need to take some corrective action in order to meet that. So it's not to say that they will necessarily be delivered outside of timescales. So I think there's something there, but I think it was the chair earlier sort of mentioned giving people a nudge, and I think this is this was the point that we were trying to get to, wasn't it, by looking at forward recommendations. It was that reminder, a nudge. This has been seen by committee now. Let's just make sure that we take those corrective actions and get those back on track. So yes, it's a timely nudge for me, and I'll make sure it's a timely nudge for officers as well. So
thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah. So anything, if there's nothing else on, sorry, Councillor Ginman.
Yes, just you. A general point here. Paul, when we get an incident in the nature of that which we've seen recently with regard to child services, obviously there are reviews out of which presumably you will find a new set of risks, or you will refine what we've got. I'm conscious that when we had the Blue School Street overspend issue, that again, people ask the question, not surprisingly, that if you've got risk covered, why do you still get events? And I suppose what I'm asking is there an overarching process to analyze these particular events and be really clear internally and externally? I mean, the external auditor might pick it up, the internal audit should be picking some of this up so that we don't get surprises. If not, what is it that we should be doing to try and avoid those surprises?
Certainly, I'm aware through a conversation at Management Board last week, we sat down and we took the time to reflect on performance and risk and the way that we approach it within the council to make sure that we're looking at the right things, I suppose, and we're, being honest and accountable as officers. So that those pieces of work happen. I certainly know of more kind of small scale reviews internally within teams and through our ability with business planning, service business plans. All those new recommendations should be or new actions that we might identify for ourselves around changing our process, considering the way things work. We should be able to capture those within our business plan, so we make sure we don't lose those pieces of work. Of course, alongside, as part of our service business plan template, we have our risk register as well. So we would identify risks and we would drive action on the back of them. So the mechanisms are there for services to be able to do that for themselves. So I think that there is something further, I think, about the reviews which will follow from this latest incident now, and how we really capture them, though. Say, kind of coming into our next paper around the risk register, can I kind of pick up a little bit more there, because obviously we're reviewing the risk plan as well. So I think it sits quite well with that piece of work as well.
Appreciate that, and thank you. The other thing is that as a council, we're not an island. There's other councils who are having their particular moments, which they wished had never happened. And we need to learn from them. And I'm just wondering about the sort of sharing of the, if I may call it, the sort of horror stories, but the ones that should never happen, I'll put it that way. And how we ensure that we then check ours and say, actually, we need to ensure we capture that.
Thank you for that. Councillor Matthews.
Yeah, very briefly, following on from Councillor Ginman's question about external auditors, you'll remember, Nigel, and I certainly do with Blue Schoolhouse, they failed to pick up those flaws. So, Paul, you're quite right, and Councillor Ginman's quite right. It's absolutely essential and important that we keep on top of things internally, because they have slipped through the net before, and that's a clear example. And it was only through opposition councillors picking it up that it was highlighted and dealt with. So don't fully rely on internal or external auditors. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Matthews. If that's all the questions and discussion on this item, I'm just looking at the recommendation. Caroline, do we have any formal recommendations that we've put together?
I don't have any formal recommendations. I do have
There's some
2
actions,
actions.
I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
some actions taken by away by members and
Yeah.
by officers, and those will be captured in the minutes.
The actions will be captured in the minutes,
and on our action tracker.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fine then. So I do have to go through the formal process. The status, so the recommendation is that the status for current audit recommendations should be reviewed, and the committee determine any recommendations it wishes to make in order to provide a further assurance that risks identified by such audit activity are being actively managed. I've had no further recommendations proposed. We've taken some actions in the minutes, or officers have taken some actions in the minutes. Can I have that put to the vote then, so that we can move on?
Yes, Chair, we've got 7 voting members. I'm just waiting for the non-voting members to leave. Just a slight delay. Okay. And the poll should be on your screen. All votes are in, Chair, and those recommendations have been unanimously approved.
Thank you. So as people rejoin, some of them won't be rejoining, I suspect, but a number will. Just to confirm that that vote was unanimous for the approval of the recommendation. And if we move to agenda item 7, the corporate risk register. Again, Paul Harris, Head of Corporate Performance, will present. Purpose of this is to consider the status of the Council's corporate risk register in order to monitor the effectiveness of risk management within the performance management framework. And while we're reviewing this, can I ask you consider any recommendations that you want to bring forward to ensure efficient risk management? Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Chair. So this report brings you the updated corporate risk register as at the end of March 2021. Since the last report to committee as at the end of January, there's been limited change to the actual risks recorded within the corporate risk register, or little change in the numbers of risks in there. So as per the heat map visual, which is identified in paragraph 5, you'll see that one previous corporate risk has de-escalated to a directorate risk register for monitoring. This is in relation to public health's ability to manage other work in the light of COVID. This risk is now reduced as a result of the improving position locally in respect of COVID-19 infections. Following a request at the last committee, hopefully you'll find an improved summary of directorate risks found at paragraph 8, showing you the changes of the risks. This provides a visual on changes within directorate risk registers since the last committee report. Within the report as well, we identify it's about 8 months now since we implemented a new risk management plan. And that was signed off by Cabinet. And whilst we've seen improvements in risk recording and monitoring, I think across the board, we recognise that we still have some work to fully implement a plan. With that in mind, we're now starting to look at the annual refresh of that risk management plan. In paragraph 12, you'll find a timetable for summer months, setting out the key elements and the timescales that we're looking to complete those for. This includes a maturity assessment from SWOT. So we're asking internal audit to look at the maturity of our risk framework and how we can strengthen that. We've started those conversations already. We've also put in there an opportunity to consult with the committee as well, obviously yourselves, in terms of what your opinions are on the current risk framework and what needs strengthening. And I think obviously through previous conversations in committees, we've already identified a couple of actions that we'd like to strengthen within our formal processes. The other one as well, this probably talks to Councillor Ginman's point on the previous item, is about an annual review of our risk recording and what we've got within our risk registers. And to me, that will, it'll include a bit of a comparison against statistical neighbours, similar authorities to ourselves, to see what they've got on their risk registers, to see if we're missing any obvious tricks, and to kind of play that back internally, as well as testing against the National Risk Register to see if there's any areas there. I think perhaps as well a bit of a time series to look of our risk registers over the last sort of 12 months, maybe 2 years as well, to see what's kind of weaving, coming and going. So hopefully that annual review will provide yourself some assurance as well of those sort of considerations of everything outside of our four walls as well. In further support of embedding risk as well within the council, we're currently arranging some training for the leadership group. The training has been delivered by a risk expert from Zurich, who's the council's insurers. At the moment, I've got a draft slide deck that we're just reviewing and just putting the dates in the diary now, hopefully later this month or early June. So very shortly, we'll have some training out for the leadership group on that, on our current framework. And I suppose just picking up on the recent judgment for children's social care. I had a conversation last week with the new DCS, Kath Knowles, to discuss the existing risks that we've got recorded on our risk register, her opinions, and what she felt we needed to do with it. So we've agreed to do a significant review of those risks in May. We'll be doing it through a DLT, so it'll be her and her leadership group. We'll sit down, we'll have a look at that risk register and make sure that I think we're articulating the right risks and that we're scoring them correctly as well. So, ultimately it's down to kind of review with that directorate. It's not just review from us onto them. It's got to be done with those in mind as well. So want to do it at the end of May after that forensic review has been completed. So it will give us a good position to include everything that needs to be included. So I think that's kind of the update from the papers, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. I've got a whole sea of hands now gone up. Councillor Matthews, I think, was first in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Paul, could I ask you, please, by reviewing the corporate risk register on a regular basis, greater assurance is given that council manages its risks effectively. Is that a marked improvement over recent times, or is or is that something that's gone back quite a while? And are you happy that the scoring of risks are appropriate?
I think obviously I alluded within my introduction to the implementation of a new risk plan last year. I think that has given us a good basis for providing greater assurance that the right risks have been discussed. Our process previously used to allow people to escalate risk based on opinion within the directorate, whereas now we know that if you're scoring risks highly, they should be escalated through to directorate risk registers and to corporate risk registers. So I think we have started to see quite a bit of change in the last, probably last 3 months, in considerable change from where we were on previous risk registers. So the corporate risks you see in front of you now look quite different to how it would have done 12 months ago. I think that certainly recognises a change, and we have different processes in place to kind of validate things as well. So we have a risk leads group with assistant directors and a director on, where we meet outside of any formal meetings, just to sit back and look at that risk framework from their perspective as well as ours. And we also have a corporate centre team meeting to provide any challenge as well. So I think we are in an improved position, but I recognise we still have further work to do to really nail it, I suppose, if I'm honest.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Can I just welcome John Roberts, our external auditor, to the meeting. He's just joined us.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. And next in line for with questions is Councillor Toynbee.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. It's really good to know that you've had a meeting with Kath. I think that's reassuring. I've just got a very small question about paragraph 6 at the bottom of page 20 in relation to COVID and the risk that's reduced. And the sentence at the top of page 21, as well as the updated local outbreak management plan and financial commitments for some dedicated staff for the coming year. Could you just say a little bit more about financial commitments for some dedicated staff for the coming year? Is that new posts? Is that redeployment? Is that specifically about COVID or more generally public health?
I will have to confess they're words that I've borrowed from the Director of Public Health's response and update to myself. I believe they are financial commitments for specific staff, and it's not redeployment. I think there have been some specific roles put in place to support the team, but I can certainly look to provide assurance on what that statement means if you'd like.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to juggle my screens and Paul, I just wanted to say thanks. Like Councillor Toynbee, I'm really, really glad that children and families risk register has been reviewed by yourself and the new interim director, because we have, well, actually, since I've been on this committee for 2 years, we were always pointing out how few risks there were. So it's really great. And that's certainly given me assurance. The other thing is that has the lead, the risk lead, has that changed now that the interim director has come on board, or is it still Kerry Morgan, the assistant director?
It hasn't changed yet. I suspect that's something we could tease out a little bit in that conversation with Kath's DLT to see. I think, given the look of profile within that risk register currently, and recognising that it may change, there is obviously a safeguarding focus on that rather than education focus. So the question will be there as to whether they want to potentially look to switch or change who that lead is.
Great, thanks.
Thank you for that. I have Councillor Balderson.
Thank you, Chair. I have two sets of questions, one on the corporate risk register and then one for corporate services. Paul, I guess for the first one for the corporate risk register. I know previous committee meetings we've talked about potentially highlighting any changes in the risk register in red, so it's far more easily identifiable on the changes. And at the moment, I see the only red is in relation to C risk number 39. So I'm assuming that there are no other changes reported in the status or action items. And I guess now that we're looking at our corporate risk register in a slightly different way, and it's now sort of the risks that essentially sit outside our risk appetite, it would be difficult to imagine that there has been no action against each of those risks in the last 3 months. So is it that it's just not reported appropriately, or is it, am I missing something?
It's not that you're missing something. I think you're assuming something that we hadn't actually done yet. Sorry, Councillor. Okay. So we're not identifying in red the bits which have specifically changed. So we have looked at all of the mitigating activities. So there will be a number of changes through extra controls in place now that weren't previously and in that column, or there will be updates and amendments in those future mitigating works. So as it stands, the red, sorry, doesn't highlight that. I think that I spotted it this morning. It looked just a bit of an oversight on our part in terms of colour coding it and refreshing when the time came. So that that's oversight on our part, sorry. So
is that something that can be implemented for the next report? Or is it something that you've decided that you don't believe is beneficial?
Certainly not something I've decided isn't beneficial. Certainly not that. Certainly we can have a look at how it would work, that, because yeah, like I say, when we do it, we kind of completely recut the line out back to what was original, and what we can do potentially then is to go back and look at what's old, what's new, and update potentially colouring on new wording. So yeah, of course, I'll take that away. The work that we did do this time around was more around that review table of directorate risk registers. I think, where was it? Was it paragraph 10, I think, or around there? So
if there was any way that as a member of public, or a committee member, can identify that the changes more readily, I would myself find that particularly useful. But I'll leave that with you for next time. My next lot of questions around corporate services. Where do I start? Okay, there's I guess with there are a number of risks in there. So we've got recruitment strategy, number 6. We've got council redesign and resources, number 9. There's quite a lot of transformation currently being undertaken. So we've got transformation in children's, we've got transformation in planning, possibly legal. And I know, for example, CS9 discusses just council redesign and resources where the risk addresses failure to meet statutory or legal duties. So I guess, but we don't really, I can't see anywhere else within the risk registers that deal with this great deal of transformation that's going on. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand, have we articulated it sufficiently? Are there other risks in relation to this transformation program that perhaps needs to be considered? And in a similar vein to the recruitment strategy, it's ranked, I think it's got a ranking of 12. I spoke at last full council about potential recruitment freeze in planning, staffing within legal, we've got issues within children. So are these risks reflective of really the current situation? That's a question.
Thank you. In terms of the transformation, I was thinking about this, and I think I would like to think that a lot of the transformation that is going on within the council is, of course, identified in the mitigating actions and the future mitigating actions. That's where I'd like to see a lot of that, because obviously the transformation work that we're doing should, of course, be mitigating other risks that we have in place. That's where I predominantly see it, but I take your point about, of course, there being significant amounts of change going on at the same point of time, and how that all hangs together. It needs to be considered well, and how staff kind of engage with that many pieces of transformation at one point of time. I suspect where that kind of takes me to is kind of the conversation I think we had at the last committee, and it's part of that conversation around the review, and one of the things that we want to look at is that horizontal vertical aggregation of risk. And I think that's probably another good example of a risk which is probably not necessarily that great in each of the areas necessarily, but when you take the cumulative impact of that, I think there's something to be thought of there. And yes, there is probably something that we need to sit back and do. I think as it stands, we haven't got that articulation about how we do that horizontal and vertical aggregation, so it's not there currently. I think it's part of those conversations that we have through that corporate centre team meeting and that challenge there around risk registers to sort of say, look, what are the things which perhaps don't sort of show in their own right, but will collectively have an impact. So I think there is something there as part of that work I want to take away as part of that review, and to articulate to that risk management plan. I think there around transformation. In relation to recruitment, I think now again, you know, I think so many of these things now, it sort of says now is a good time to review, and I'm conscious that I'm sort of saying now is a good time to review a number of these things for yourselves. But I think with this latest judgment, you know, the latest judgment came midway through April, and that's going to really push, or it's going to cause significant issues again, I think, for children's services. I think, you know, that's obviously been widely recognised already. The recruitment risk on the corporate risk register, on the corporate services risk register, is about the recruitment strategy of the council. That's the overarching thing. But again, it probably talks about this sort of push and pull across sort of aggregated or specific risks. So certainly, I know you go back a couple of months ago, though, we were talking about being in a better position with recruitment in children's services. So actually, that risk felt like it was reducing. I think obviously the current judgment will potentially have an impact on that, and it may cause us to kind of re-escalate that. And again, you know, when we sit back and we review the end of month and end of quarter risks now coming forward, the question will be there about organisationally, do we need to escalate that risk as a council risk and not just within pockets, small pockets? Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. Watch this space. I will. Yeah. Just one last really quick question, please, Chair, if that's all right. So also staying on the corporate services risk register, CS21 looks like a copy of CS22. And there are a couple of things on the risk register, for example, CS14 about a dental survey, CS16 about substance use, and then CS21 and 22, which is about fast shower. So are these corporate? To me, these seems like they should be in different directorate risk registers. It might be my naivety in terms of how everything works together, but I was surprised to see it on the corporate services risk register and not on another one.
Public health now aligns to the corporate centre. So this time last year, it was part of adult social care or adults and communities. It's now part of corporate centre. So obviously its escalation route is up through corporate centre, and similarly, Fastershire aligns to Natalia Silva, AD of corporate support. So that's it. If that's its kind of alignment channel, as it were. So yeah, they'll escalate up through there.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
I've got Councillor Watson patiently waiting. I've got some questions myself, which I'll come in afterwards. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to pick up actually, sorry, I was just taking down my hand, but realising Democratic Services do that for me. It's really picking up on this transformation, and because the recent judgment is in really at the forefront of many of our minds, and looking at what's happening currently, I see under EP01 that there is a risk register around the cost increase in providing special transport. But actually, what is the cost increase in terms of the transformation that's currently going on? And, you know, so we've got our current staff, but we're bringing in other staff, and I'm assuming that we're going to be paying for that. And in terms of our financial reporting, in terms, you know, where does that go on a risk register? Because actually the practice has huge implications on the budget. So again, Paul, would you be able to explain that to me, where that cost increase sits, like within children and families, or,
Certainly, within, say, children and families, we've had a long-standing risk there about the ability to deliver budgets and savings necessary there. So specific services have held these cost increase or inability to balance budget risks for a period of time, as EP1, as you've identified there. Again, some of this comes back to this sort of aggregation of risk, I suppose, doesn't it? We talked about just before around if there's numerous if there's numerous services holding their own risk around the delivery of the budget, there is then conversation about as to how does that look corporately. And I think last 12 months, obviously we had the financial impacts of COVID risk identified within our risk register, which I think then that stepped down as at the end of December, I believe, or in the last report to committee, because obviously there was greater clarity about where that money was coming from. There is something now, I think, obviously with the increased budget, increased savings requirements for this next 12 months, I think there's a conversation to be had there with whether it's Andrew, whether it potentially Josie, about reinstating a risk around kind of budgets corporately or organizationally rather than as individual entities. So, we could wrap those up. And what we might do then is, and I think this is part of that mechanism then, if we're identifying one as a significant risk organizationally, we don't necessarily need to be kind of reporting in all the little parts which make that up, but that's part of that process that we need to make sure that we wrap up in terms of a proper way of aggregating risks organizationally. So I don't want to lose risks. So people say they don't have to escalate this because it sits up as part of that. But at the same time, we don't want you to be inundated by 20 risks, all identifying separate budget lines each quarter. So I think that's where that part of the process is important, that we get that right there. So but yes, I certainly see, I think that the conversation will be there with Andrew now, or Josie potentially, just around what does the risk look like when we're pulling it together at the end of May or end of June for the committee and for kind of corporate risk register, that challenge into the corporate centre team meeting. What's the budget risk now to the council and how do we articulate that here?
Can I just come back on that? Yeah, please, Chair. It's just because I was thinking about the judgment and the additional staffing costs that are now being put in place because of that. I know that we had the judgment and the recommendations in February 2019, and we have changed staffing structures, but this is very specific and it's got quite a lot of national involvement. So, yeah. So if you're able to have your conversation with whoever it's about, is that a risk that we, and I don't know how else to say it, but we keep chucking money at it. But if it's a cultural problem, then how do you root out that cultural change or practice? So yeah. And that's really what I'm getting to. It's like, how do you deep dive, and like any invasive species coming as a gardener, it's like Japanese knotweed, how you've got to keep at it, you've got to keep digging it out, but where the implications in terms of money and budgets. Thanks. I hope that made sense.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I've got Councillor Ginman, but before I turn to him, I'm going to leap in myself, if I may, because I've got probably three areas or three questions. One of which follows up from your comments, Councillor Watson. I think really dealing with the aggregation of risk as regards finance and resources. I know, and that's perhaps to include finance and reserves. I know that SIPFA, I think it was SIPFA rather than the LGA, had started a process by which they were ranking councils in terms of their financial risk, which is quite a difficult thing to do, because as you start to study different authorities, you realize how different they are in terms of the way they operate, their responsibilities, their reserves, what traditionally they've done and they haven't done. So it's quite a difficult thing to judge whether the apple is more secure than the pear. But it's a way of doing it. I just wondered, Josie, whether you're in a position to just comment on any view that as Assistant 151 or Deputy 151 you might have on a sort of aggregating the risks to finance and reserves as an issue that should be reflected in the corporate risk register at the moment. I'll leave you thinking about that for a minute, if I may. Just turning to the training, delighted to see some training being done for the executive board. I'm just wondering how pertinent that training might be to members of the committee, because I struggle to understand risks and why they're not there, and when they are there, why they're being mitigated or not mitigated to the extent they are, and what that relationship is. I'd welcome the opportunity to piggyback onto this this training if possible, but I'm conscious that the board may view having committee members there as an impediment to their working. I just wondered if we could put that question forward, either as a special session for us or a joint session, which I think actually would be most beneficial for us to understand better the board's view, especially now that we have a new chief executive officer. So if the committee's in agreement, I mean, it's not a you must attend, it's more of a to have the opportunity to piggyback on this training. I'd appreciate that. The other thing comes back to there's this recent court case, and the surprise of the majority of councillors that this court case was even on, although it is clearly articulated in CIR 52 on our corporate risk register. And I'm just wondering how best this committee can articulate some of what's on the register to the wider councillors, whether or not we should be reporting on the changes, at least to the corporate risk register. I'm mindful that CRR 04 is there. This is our human rights claims. They're going to be coming before the courts. I'm not wanting the same surprise to be forthcoming from people, from councillors and the wider, well, ideally the wider people, that these are risks and we are aware of them, and they are, you know, they will come to fruition at some time or other. I'm just wondering if we should be reporting any changes to the corporate risk register as a short paragraph, as a coming from this committee after the committee meeting, when we consider corporate risks. I suspect that, you know, there may be some councillors that are unaware that we have a corporate risk register, unfortunately, but perhaps bringing their attention to it might mean that they get less surprises coming in future. I don't know. Something for the committee, perhaps a threat to the committee to discuss as much as anything else. Before I leave then, Josie, I don't know whether you wanted to come back on my initial point about finance, aggregation of finance and reserves risk.
Absolutely. So the financial performance and reporting of reserves is obviously goes to Cabinet. So the first quarter performance outturn report to Cabinet will report on the financial impact of the risks that we've seen and the steps that we've taken to address those risks. So I'm just thinking in my mind what the committee's role is, because obviously they're looking at the risk and there will be a financial risk from those risks. But the financial performance and reserves reporting mechanism is to Cabinet, and I wonder if it goes there first and then what is discussed at Cabinet is then brought to this committee. I'm not sure really of the correct structures. Perhaps I'll take that away as something to consider so that this committee can see, have its comment and review of those actions that are being taken, the potential impact of those. How does that sound, Chair?
It sounds an action that you're taking, and I welcome that, and we'll see what comes out of it. Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, I was heading in the same direction as some of your thoughts a moment ago, I think, Nigel. Paul, fundamentally, a risk register at the end of the day is just a way of managing items, isn't it? It's a case of directing the attention of management to certain things and making sure they're dealt with. What it doesn't do, in a way, is it doesn't tell you that they are dealt with, and it's therefore, there will still be events that happen, and human frailty being what it is, there will always be cases that will suddenly turn up. But how you then reduce that risk and how you reduce the impact of that risk is what we're talking about here. So, taking Nigel's comment just now, I think it is important that we communicate to councillors and to the public that having a risk register doesn't mean that you have got rid of all your risks. All you've done is try to identify those that are there to assist management in managing them. Well, that's how you'd look at it in a business sense. So we will always add to it, we will always reduce it. I was interested with Quentin's reply earlier on, because I was looking at one particular item that was on the corporate register, which is, I think it's on page 26, CRR 50, school assets. And that shows what the risk is before you take mitigation, and it's gone down after you take mitigation. But I was mindful of what he said and found myself sort of going, okay, he's been surprised that or he didn't get engaged with the risk situation beforehand. But he also said that assets are declining because there ain't enough money to match what's required to keep them up to speed. So whilst we may have been mitigating the risk by doing better targeting, which is in effect what he's doing, the risk still remains, and it's one that is going to have to be tackled by councillors now and in the future, and governments, that basically there's a declining structure for education. And it's no use saying, it says further mitigation required. It actually requires a pretty radical approach to it, and yet we've reduced it from 25 to 16. And I'm trying to square that in my own head with what his comments were earlier. And I think therein understanding what risk registers can do, but what the actions you take from them are crucial.
Yes. How do I respond to that one? Obviously you're completely right. What we're not doing this to just park stuff and just say, oh, well, look, we had it on a risk register. That serves nobody any purpose. And I think I alluded to it a bit before. It's that alignment with business planning. So this should be at the forefront of our minds. We have a service business plan template, which includes your risk register for your service. So at that point where you're sitting down looking about the priorities, you'd be looking to identify what your key risks are whether it's within your part of the service or whatever, and then scoring them appropriately to go, well, actually, this is quite significant. So this needs to escalate up the chain, and it needs to, get sight of more eyes and subsequently open up. I think the way we used to kind of articulate it was, you escalate a risk to open up the amount of controls able to you. So whether that's financial, whether that's resource, and I think that's the purpose there, and perhaps almost squaring that bit. It's a bit of a reminder for people in terms of that training. It's that's why we do it. We look at this as a positive thing, and that's one of the things I had a conversation with the risk lead from Zurich. It was, I want to sell it as a bit of a positive thing to, and when I say leadership group, sorry, I should have been clearer before. There's an extended leadership group, so it's not just management board, the directors and the ADs. There's a wider group beyond that of, it's about 50 people, I think, head of service and above. So that's our intended audience for the training. But yeah, so I was kind of quite clear that I want us to sell the positive impacts of that and the positive benefits of risk management, rather than just, it's a chore, you've got to come back to it, you've got to do it at the end of every month, every quarter. You've got to spend the time doing it, because actually this should inform your business planning. If then you haven't got controls within your grasp, you raise it up, you escalate it. Part of it being on a corporate risk register, and I welcome Councillor Shaw's points about how we might be able to kind of communicate this on elsewhere a little bit further. That should be on there, and it should then start to lodge itself in people's mindset to go, well, actually, do you know what, we either need to do something completely different here, we need to invest significantly in it to meet it, or we accept that it's going to be like that forevermore, and we're just going to, it's going to become more and more problematic for us in say the school assets risk. So certainly, yeah, I'd welcome any opportunity to kind of work with you all to just sort of see how do we have potentially another sort of escalation route, and perhaps, like I said, I think in terms of that plan, maybe sort of some more informal consultation over summer with yourselves to look at what that risk management plan articulates within it, because part of that is that escalation channel as well. And if we can kind of write into there that, from sitting at this committee, we look at the risk registers, and actually from there, we support yourselves to make broader council more aware, then that might be a beneficial output from that as well. So
thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, it does seem to me that this does need an active process of ensuring that risk and management of risk are going hand in hand. Identification is all very well, but it doesn't, if you're not getting the management of it, if you're not getting it where you're getting the really difficult bits, which somebody is saying, well, I can't manage this because I don't have the facilities, the abilities, or it's outside of my possible area, then that gap analysis becomes absolutely vital for a business. Otherwise, you fall through it. So I'm tempted to wonder, Chair, whether we ought to be looking at each of these particular parts of the structure of the council with a cabinet member and with the lead official, and start to say, right, these are the risks identified in here. How are you handling this? Where's your problems? And actually start to delve a bit harder and a bit deeper into each of those areas and hold to account in a more scrutiny-like way, if I use that phrase. I mean, I don't know, Christy, this might be something that you're in your review that you're looking at, but it just strikes me, looking at this and reading it through and thinking of the conversation we've just had, that it might be something we ought to, as a committee, be perhaps pursuing.
Thank you, Councillor Ginnan. Councillor Bolison, did you want to come in on that?
I would certainly support Councillor Ginnan. I mean, I found today incredibly useful speaking to each of the officers in relation to those outstanding internal audit recommendations. And I think, I mean, every meeting that we see the corporate risk register, we always ask about, well, that the actions don't appear to be changing, what is actually happening. And so, if we were able to hold some of the key officers to account and get them to talk to some of those things in the corporate risk register, I would fully support that as well.
Thank you. So that might, if we can form some sort of recommendation around that, that would be useful. I'm conscious we've had the opportunity this meeting to spend some time on the corporate risk register and corporate risks, which isn't always afforded in our work schedule in so much as we've had the time to do it today. And we might want to just reflect on that and how we might want to modify work work timetable going forwards to if we've got this interest. Kate Charlton.
Yes, just to pick up members' comments previously about how issues can be tracked and how this committee can look at more detail and hold officers and members to account. Actually, it's contained within the functions of this committee to be able to do that, to be able to call senior officers and appropriate members to account for relevant issues within the committee. So you do have that function anyway.
Yep. Thank you. Yes, we have used the function in the past. What is sort of reflected today, that it's often actually diving from the sort of assistant director level and even head of service level, that we actually start to better get an articulation perhaps of the issues closer to the coalface, which are being reflected in the in performance or in risk. Sometimes it's I suspect it's because we're not certain where and I think Councillor Balderson mentioned it earlier, particularly where the risk lies, or where the responsibility lies in relation to the sort of the structure of the department, and who's particularly involved with it. We might well look, therefore, possibly at a deep dive into one or two of the corporate risks, I think, coming forward, and something that I'll discuss with committee, whether they'd like to do that. In order to understand these things in more detail. It's unfortunate, something that it's experience, isn't it? And it's time that we have spent on this committee, understanding and beginning to appreciate in a better depth where these issues lie. Anybody else want to bring forward a recommendation or a question at this time?
If I may just make a comment on your last one, I think that during this time that we've done everything online, it has its limitations, and the period of sensible concentration and being able to engage will be very different when we're back to face. So this committee, as most of council, has existed more in terms of digital world than it has in a face-to-face world. Yep. And I get the feeling that when we do get back round the table, we will be able, it will help the engagement, and I would hope also then it will help the scrutiny by so doing.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Ginnan. Councillor Bolter, you did have your hand up at one time. I don't know if you wanted to come in or.
No, it was on a point earlier on about the rethinking governance. I was going to where we're up to in that aspect of it, to throw it open. But Peter covered it off and came across to Christy. So
yeah,
okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Caroline, do we have any? Did we capture any recommendation coming out of this? There are some actions, I think.
There's some actions. I've got one, which is consideration be given that the committee undertake a deep dive on 1 to 2 of the risks on the corporate risk register to better understand them.
Right. Let's not specify 1 to 2, but let's just say the committee will identify a risk or risks on the corporate risk register to take a deep dive at a. Yep. So, Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, to be fair, I was suggesting that we actually took directorates and we took them and had a look at a directorate's own risk, so that we take that particular one. So it's not necessarily the risk, it's all and every bit of it, to understand what it is, how they're managing it, and to better understand it and question them on it.
Yeah, is that the view of you all? That we, yep, okay, that's fine. Caroline, can you just amend that recommendation accordingly then?
Yes, I can.
And could you just remind us what actions we've asked? It's not putting you on the spot.
Unfortunately, I haven't highlighted them in my notes, Councillor Shaw, but they have been captured.
Right, you'll pick them up and we can check them in the minutes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Fine. Can I ask then that if there's no other comments, that the vote be put? Just to remind you that could you just read out the recommendation, Caroline, before we vote? Sorry.
Sorry, I've got something in the middle of my screen as well, so just bear with me one moment.
Just so that we're clear on what we're voting for.
Consideration be given that the committee identify a risk or risks to undertake a deep dive on a directorate risk register.
7 voting members, Chair, and the poll should be on your screen.
Thank you.
All votes are in, Chair, and the recommendations have been unanimously approved.
Thank you for that. We've nearly been sitting for 2 hours. I just wonder if does committee want a 5-minute comfort break? I've got one shake of the head, one thumb up. Well, I'd like a 5 minutes comfort break. So the can I ask that we reassemble at 12? Thank you, and welcome you all back to the Audit and Governance meeting. For legal reasons, I'll just need to make sure that all committee members can hear and see. So if you could verbally confirm that you're able to hear me, and I'll confirm in response that I can hear you. Councillor Christy Balderson?
Yes, Chair, I can see and hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Bolter?
Same here, see and hear, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Ginman?
Can see and hear.
Thank you. Councillor Bob Matthews?
Yes, see and hear you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Diana Toynbee?
Yes, thanks. I can see you and hear you.
Councillor Yolandi Watson?
Yes, likewise, I can hear and see you. Thank you.
Thank you. So we were just coming on to agenda item 9, the Rethinking Governance Working Group. And I think Kate Charlton, you'll provide a short introduction to this, will you? You're just muted at that.
Yes. So this is a report to advise the committee and to ask the recommendations that Rethinking Governance continue further workshops and in terms of their ideas and their proposals to come back to full council at a later date. Following their detailed work at the moment. So Councillor Balderson has been chairing the Rethinking Working Group, and perhaps Councillor Balderson would like to further update the committee in terms of where the committee have got to and where they want to go to.
Yep, certainly can. Yeah, so we're asking to delay not only to look at the issues that were raised by the court case and full council, but also to make sure that we have the time for the constitutional changes that we may be recommending to be undertaken with the utmost care and attention. And it is such a core document in terms of the way that it operates. We do want to make sure that it any recommendations, we cross the T's and we dot the I's. So that is the main thrust of that. We brief discussions last week. Hopefully we'll be looking at or aiming for reporting back to the June Audit and Governance Committee, and then July full council. Last week, we updated all the members on the work that had been undertaken by A&G, and also the great deal of work that Councillor Watson put into the planning element. So hopefully, it was a lot of information that we sent out. So hopefully members are slowly going through that in a positive way. And then next week, we will have another all members briefing. We're currently scheduled for the 11th of May, and we are looking at offering at least one other date and time for member involvement, because we appreciate that not everyone can attend that particular day and time. That workshop's going to focus on our work around scrutiny and the work around, oh, excuse me, the work around the climate change, our considerations around the climate change task and finish group. We have also developed efficiency and effectiveness report on scrutiny similar to that of A&G, and we hope that a draft of that will be sent out with a slide deck to all members as well to give an explanation as to the direction that some of our emerging recommendations have come from. We'll also in the briefing outline any of the outstanding matters that we're currently reviewing, so that when we get to A&G in June, we'll be able to then encapsulate all of our recommendations and then have one final members briefing between A&G and full council. So that's where we're at.
Thank you, Councillor Balderson, for that. Noting in the report on page 89 that there states item 9, paragraph 9, a report on progress provided to the July meeting. So what we're actually suggesting, I think, here is that a report will be provided to the June meeting, and that's understanding that the June meeting will be rescheduled from the 16th of June to the 28th. I'm not sure whether this is the right point at which we reschedule that meeting, but
that is the request so far.
Yeah, the report coming forward requires that that we reschedule that meeting, and therefore the report will come forward at the June meeting rather than the July meeting, in time for a July meeting of council. Fine. And the request to defer was unanimous from the working party. Thank you. Right. Okay. So unless there's any other questions for Councillor Balderson, no. So the recommendation before us is that the recommendation of the Rethinking Governance Group in connection with the changes to the Council's constitution be deferred until later in the municipal year 2021-22. That's the recommendation, and we can, if there's no other comment or question, we can vote on that.
Yeah, but I move the recommendation, Chairman.
Thank you. Can we ought to vote, I think.
Seven voting members again, Chair, and the poll should be on your screen.
Thank you.
All votes are in, Chair, and the recommendations have been unanimously approved.
Thank you. So with that recommendation approved, we move on to agenda item 10, the work programme update. So there is a comment I'd like to make. Some comments were raised at the extraordinary council meeting and later in the press that the whistleblowing process and policy that we have, which we reviewed only in October, isn't sufficiently robust. So I'd like to ask the monitoring officer whether she can review again that process and ask her how she can give further reassurance to this committee that the process is robust, is working, and provides us with a proper whistleblowing process by which members of the council staff or councillors or members of the public can raise issues in a proper manner. I believe that's an appropriate addition, and having discussed it with her, she's happy to undertake that and to report back to us. Is there any other comment on the
Chair, could I just check, when would you like to receive that report?
We've got quite a busy session in June, but I think given its importance, I'll use those awful words, awful abbreviations, ASAP, but I think probably July, we have a July meeting.
That's correct.
Well, then perhaps in July, in order to, because there's a lot of work to it. There may be some work that needs doing in order to provide us with that assurance, and I want to give her time to do that. Kate.
Yes, yes, thank you, Chair. The monitoring officer has asked me as deputy monitoring officer to undertake that work, and thank you for the time for July, because yes, I will need that, and part of that will be looking at what other councils are doing so we can benchmark.
Yeah, I mean, I'm conscious we made changes. We brought in an independent external counsel to act as an appropriate sort of independent body to advise. So you may want to, you know, I'm not. It's not for us to be prescriptive in how you go about this, but obviously we'd be interested in how the process is working and how it might be improved yet further.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Also, to change under this section, we ought to change officially the date of the next meeting to the 28th of June. Unless I do that later on, but I'll do that now. Any other comments on the work programme? Councillor Ginman.
Yeah, under 3510E, what we've basically just agreed in the previous session on this actually does allow us to, well, that's almost saying this is what we should be doing. So perhaps we can start to think about populating that with particular directorates under that basis, which in effect what Kate Charlton earlier said, you know, we have the power to do it, well, let's do it. And that seems to me to be something which we need to populate in there accordingly.
Right, we'll ask the clerk to coordinate with the chair and vice chair to populate that. Does the committee have any preference as to who or which directorate we look at in these terms first? Perhaps they'll communicate any preference to me or to the vice chair subsequent to the meeting. John, I think John Roberts wants to come in, so
thanks, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. And just to confirm, the 28th of June is absolutely fine in terms of our responsibilities, but there will be quite a few items from external audit then. We'll issue our audit findings report for the previous year, our annual audit letter, and our plan for the following year. It's later than we would have expected, clearly, and we've been holding back whilst we've completed the vast majority of our audit work. We've been holding back finalisation of our reports, because we were aware that a court case was due and it would have implications both for post-balance sheet event disclosure, but also for our value for money conclusion. So those will be dealt with in the report by the end of June. But we will be in a position to issue that earlier. So what I would suggest to the committee is that we could, with your agreement, issue our audit findings report so that you members would be cited on that at an earlier stage rather than waiting until the end of June.
I see thumbs up and nodding of heads. So yes, we're happy to receive the report earlier if it's in a position to be released. Fine, thank you, and thank you for your comment there in the meeting. And let's just checking that I've got no other nothing else to do. So the date of the next meeting will be the 28th of June 2021. Just to thank all of the committee for attending, officers for attending, and John Roberts, external auditor, for attending the meeting. This is scheduled to be the final virtual meeting before, so the 28th meeting on the 28th of June is scheduled to be in person, and look forward to seeing you all then. Of course, we're not certain at this moment in time of the location of the meeting, but that will be verified in due course. So finally, before I formally close the meeting, can I check with Democratic Services that the live stream is switched off and we're no longer broadcasting?